Welcome to the Compromised to Alchemized podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Neil Bolchandani. I'm excited as you join me in this journey to listen to my conversations with some of the leading experts in the field of healing from a broad range of disciplines. All right. So hello and greetings. This is the Compromised to Alchemized podcast with me, Dr. Neil Bolchandani, and here we have Dr. Amy Albright, and it's a privilege to have you. We've had a lot of conversations and voice memos. This is our first face-to-face conversation. I'm thrilled to have you, honored to have you, eager for what we're going to talk about. And to set the tone for that, I would just say, if anybody's listening, you probably won't notice this at this point, but right when we were hopping on, the power went out for Amy over there, and it was just like instantly. And then thankfully with her setup, we were, generator up and running so we could hop right back on. But the first thing I thought when that happened was like, oh, that's fitting, because we're about to have this amazing time, but also Amy's about to output something that I believe will be transcendent and beautiful. And so that just feels fitting that the power would go out in kind of a nod to that future talk that we're about to have. So yeah, so I wanted to say thanks, Dr. Amy. There's so much I could say about who you are, but your reputation precedes you with the whole on experience, all the things you've done in your career before that, and with neuroscience, neurofeedback, but also this mystery school, the gifts that you have and the gifts that you love evoking in others. And even in our times together, so many voice memos have come when I'm driving to the Bay Area or back from somewhere else, and I've just felt your wisdom and your the way that you amplify those with whom you speak, and I felt that, and I'm very thankful for that. So really happy for this conversation, and yeah, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been really fun having a professional relationship and a friendship, and it's exciting to be able to bring what are really rich conversations that we're used to having together, so that other people can kind of, witness it. It's going to be a really fun exploration, and yeah, it's really what an adventure that my power went out and my full house generator. This is part of living up in the mountains now. I used to be in Southern California, so it's a bit of an adventure, and here we go. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were in not too far from where I'm at. I'm in Santa Barbara, but go to LA often. You were in San Diego, right? So not too far away. Now you're up in the woods, closer to Sacramento-ish, but not really. It's
Yeah, I'm in the mountains of I'm in the Sierras, and
mhm.
it's you're kind of near Tahoe. It's Nevada City, California. It's confusing, the name. It's in
Yeah.
California, and I absolutely love it here. So I'm really so grateful to be in a much quieter experience of reality. It's really helped me to tune into myself and go slower in so many ways, even though my life is anything but slow.
Yeah, and I want to give a nod to who connected us. I just remembered a wonderful, amazing person, Karindi Ong. She is an SLP, speech language therapist, and it's funny. I use the letters, and that she's also well versed in Myo. She's done body work, but more than that, she's just a very deep, soulful person that loves connecting people. She is brilliant, yes, and then she just looks to see where can she find people who can connect. And I remember when she gave me your info and she did a little intro, and from that, I think Hannah, your person, got in on it to help us connect, and then that led to so many wonderful conversations into this. So shout out to you, Karindi, for connecting Amy and I'm so thankful for that. And I think that's what happened is like Karindi knew that, hey, I'm Neil who does this airway feeding work, and you're Amy who has got this movement with all of the things that we talked about that you're doing, and where do we intersect and where do we interconnect? I'd love to go into that with you. And you were just sharing with me like your appreciation for interconnectedness, but also you spoke some words about how overlap. And I mean, I would love to hear more of your
Yeah.
thoughts on that and just kind of how you saw that happen with us and just in general, some wisdom on that.
Yeah, totally. So you'll notice that as I traverse, you're a bit used to it, but the listener will notice that I go into the most abstract and philosophical, and then into nerdy neurosciences, and then make sure that everything is grounded into practicality. So as far as the interconnectedness, I will first start with that, the teaching that comes from so many ancient traditions and still is very alive today about all of us being one, or all of us being interconnected. And there are many different languages for that, or lenses for that through the world, through time. But it's just something that I deeply believe to be true. And I also know it doesn't really matter if we believe it to be true unless we can embody that and we live that way. Because as a thought construct, it's sort of, well, it's not helpful. It's a philosophical construct. But so much of what it is that I understand about how medicine works and about how life works and about, who we really are at a deeper level comes from the understanding of us, in my opinion, being timeless souls on an endless journey, being downloaded into a particular form in this moment, and I'm so curious about the world that you understand in embryology, because I feel like that's just it's a moment where the doorway is being formed into life, right? For structure and for function and all of that kind of thing. But how does how does that grand perspective inform our most healthy way of functioning as an individual? Because I
Mm,
think that a lot of the times what can get lost in any branch of medicine is when we forget kind of the meta frame. A lot of the times, or in business, I'm also a strategic advisor for business. Again, my career path makes no sense, and how what it is that I'll end up speaking about doesn't seem to go together. But a lot of the times, really, really smart people can be missing an element of strategy that is the place where the solution is found, because they're not zooming out enough to be able to understand and have the perspective. They're missing certain puzzle pieces or keys because they're zoomed in and myopic and maybe accidentally reductionistic, right?
mhm,
Or accidentally trying to be too linear, when actually the intuitive and or innovative process, the creative process, wants to take over and be able to help to connect dots, which then we can retroactively, probably back up with science, if not now, maybe in 10 years.
mhm,
But yeah, this interconnectedness piece, I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine, so there isn't an element of the body. There's not a square inch or an element of the body that isn't covered and infused with energy. And it runs in very methodical ways through acupuncture meridians, and through something abstract called the triple burner, which is sort of a
mhm,
Chinese medicine version of chakras, right? And we could, with a scientific or critical mind, poo poo that kind of stuff. Like, well, it doesn't,
mhm.
none of that seems very real. What's a triple burner, or what's a, you know, but the fact of the matter is that Chinese medicine has been around for a long time because it's effective. And why is, so how we get those results, or the framing, that meta frame that ancient China had as they were developing this honestly, extremely advanced medicine. um, it included other ways of looking at the world, which what we learn then when we look at modern medicine is that it can be a both are true. And
Mhm.
I feel like that's something that I really want to be able to talk about with you, is like, we can understand something from like a molecular biology level, or we could think about it from an embryological level, or we could talk about it from a functional medicine level, and like, and there's also this system of correspondences, and the sense of elements, or sense of journey that we're on as individuals, or that our clients and patients are on, um, and to be
Yeah.
able to really look at that from the both are true. How do you feel
Oh
when I
yeah.
talk about the both are true?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, in you said a lot of other things around it that were so good, but yeah, the both are true. Holding like those things in tension and paradoxes, or I love those things because I feel like they need to coexist, and we are that swirling around within us, and also everybody is that. So um, I feel like it resonates. And so, even you mentioned molecular biology, embryology, functional medicine. I'm like, oh yeah, you're describing my history because that's my, where I started as molecular biology, and then I went into other things. But interestingly enough, yeah, I love your background as you've had it within the Chinese medicine world, because growing up in an Indian household, parents both from India, we understood some of the concepts of Ayurvedic medicine, and even just
Mm.
the way of thinking that is. And then I had have such an appreciation for Chinese medicine, because these are ancients and they've been around. In fact, when I was trying to decide what I was going to do beyond molecular biology, beyond being a chemist, briefly, I was convinced I was going to go to Chinese medical school in Chicago to study acupuncture. You know what I ended up doing is I ended up falling into an insecurity, and I chose something that would seem more reputable on paper, which was Doctor of Chiropractic. Uh,
Mhm.
So I went into chiropractic college thinking I'll do that, but you know what I'll do is I'll really study acupuncture. Then I got in
Yeah.
and I got, helped by an adjustment. And I'm thankful for what I did and what I've learned through chiropractic college. But I was really drawn in by Chinese medicine first. And then, coming out the other side of it, and then now into a much wider expanse of what I get to do and, hold these fields for people. Um, I feel like it is necessary to just, what you're saying is hold these belief, Western and or clinical science and or data and research. These are good. We need that. Yet, like you said, the elements, and coming back to this appreciation that we have so much technology within us, and most of us need to ground and become more in tune with what's been available and what we have that we can harness in our earth and also within us. So I feel like every day it's good to hold tension as like, how can I be? So my kind of, where I go with this is like, when I look at how I can be a place of support for someone, I don't want to steer them anywhere. I want to hold a place for them so that they can go where they need to go, so that I provide safe, in a way, tethers for them. And I feel that so much from what we've talked about, and even in our conversations, where you have a lot of experience in that. So yeah, so I feel like the juggling match that can be there when you're holding two, for me, is like a necessary beauty. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love that
It
combination.
creates a dynamic tension rather than a conflict. And I
Yeah.
loved how you put it, not to steer for our patients, our clients, but to open or to help anchor or tether in certain ways. And I feel like that's something that was deeply infused in me in my very first days and weeks and months of practice is let me be here as a conduit for a miracle.
Mm,
And I am not better than the person in this room. I think that a lot of people who are in positions of power, whether it's doctors or anyone else in society, can start to be held as above or separate than, or hold themselves as above or separate than. And I don't actually want to be anybody's savior. I would rather be a person that can co create a miracle. And if
and
I believe that the person in front of me is a walking, living, breathing miracle, and it doesn't mean that I don't understand how they walk or how they breathe, or, yeah, sure, I went to school. But what is
mm,
that life force? What is that miracle? If anybody's ever been in the room when a baby is born and
mm,
had dry eyes, I don't even know what to do. I mean, maybe an obstetrician or a midwife because they've done it hundreds or thousands of times. But
yeah.
it is so potent and powerful to be fully alive and witness life and to be fully, fully present with someone. And so I feel like that's where we can take all of these like reservoirs and catalogs and whatever of knowledge of information that's passed down through these schools that we have learned, right? Because we, no matter what our path, we always had to learn,
Mm,
orthopedic and neurological evaluation. Like even in Chinese medicine,
mm,
we still have the rigors of the modern medicine. But how do we hold that in a way where we're not limited by that, where we're listening to something that is beyond?
mm,
And I feel like that part of that miracle that we all are is we're intuitive creatures. And somewhere in modern medicine, we lost that, but it wasn't actually that long ago. I've been doing a little bit of study on this lately, and I'm reading about how, even just 100 years ago, doctors, medical doctors were challenged internally and as a person to figure out how to solve for each patient's malady
Hmm.
in a different way. And I'm not saying everyone, obviously, these are generalizations, versus the medical model that we're looking at now is like, well, you don't fit a diagnosis, so we either give you a junk diagnosis or we'll just tell you there's nothing we can do, right?
Yeah.
And what I know in our conversations is that when we find that person that we know they are struggling and that they don't have a clear name or a diagnosis or a clear treatment plan path that is established, that we actually sit in a deep way with like it's a cracking open as a doctor that says, how do I serve this person? And what do they really need? And what is really going on here? And allowing for that creative process to be present, allowing for ourselves to witness. I think it's a very courageous act. I think that it takes something, because you have to feel, you have to be compassionate, you have to connect with the person in order to care that much. And it can be hard to care about people who are suffering and we don't have any obvious answer for.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And that's I think, just kind of some people where they go is they feel that difficulty and challenge, and then they also look inward and they can notice, have they taken care of themselves as well? That
Mm,
can be a bit of resonance that they find that pings on that place. And then I think there's that place in me too when it's like a few years ago when I finally said at my trainings and when I was doing with teaching other practitioners, other healers, I in my now it's the floor of the mouth training, but my airway centered, all these things. I For years I didn't say this one phrase, and I say it in the middle of my trainings. I say, I would be remiss if I didn't explain that intuitive empathy and empathic realm isn't a massive part of what I'm putting out there and what I want to teach you. Because I know that, like, for me, if I were going by my clinical knowledge and by what I've learned, I wouldn't know I wouldn't be helping people in the way that I get to help people right now. I
yeah.
lean so heavily on that intuition to guide me and to follow so that I could, find in these moments with people one by one, what do they need? And I witnessed my dad do that as a cardiologist when he would kind of
Mm,
escape his training, even though he learned in India, so he learned there versus Western medicine, but he still, can sometimes have that constriction placed on him by those, hospitals and structures that he was working within. But I saw him wade through it all and just look to see what would give somebody joy and help them laugh in the moment, and then
mhm.
that sometimes was his, you know, greatest treatment, and patients would say that. So
Yeah. In Chinese
yeah.
medicine, pathology of the heart comes from a repression or a dysfunction of joy. So
Mm,
that's an
yeah.
interesting correlation, right? For him to be administering the medicine of joy as a cardiologist, it doesn't mean that you're not also going to use your intellect,
Yeah.
but to recognize that, I mean, is there ever too much joy? Like,
Right.
I think that
Yeah.
we could all have more doses of that,
Yeah,
right? And
absolutely. Yeah.
administering more doses of that as medicine for us as practitioners. So I love that. Um, when you were saying that, what I was tuning into is um, when you're the creative, that what is the solution that's present, kind of feeling into process. Now I'm going to switch over into my neurosciences hat, which has
Hmm.
been there for me since I was 18 years old. I'll maybe tell a story about that later.
Yeah, would love
But
to.
in my work with the brain, and especially in this last 14 years, I can really say that people who are locked inside of rigid, linear ways of thinking are absolutely having a certain overall neurological pattern. There's still going to be a huge amount of specificity about the way that a particular person's brain represents or presents. But for the most part, there can be a lot of front to back rather than cross hemispheric connection.
Mm,
When
mm,
somebody is being very linear, logical, sequential, and in a way working from rote mechanism, right? Because at that point, even if you are being presented with a case or a life situation, maybe it is for those that aren't doctors or practitioners listening, and you think you know exactly what's happening, and you think you have to follow some protocol, basically, right? Like a lot of medicine has been reduced, a lot of practitioners have reduced themselves to being technicians who execute action steps per protocols. I would say that's one of the most pathological things that we've been doing
Mm, yeah.
as a society with medicine. And
Hmm.
what happens when we're in that mode is that we're not able to have a lot of compassion because we see the person in front of us not as a person, but as a thing we have to do, right? And that's a
Yeah.
very different perspective versus when we have that presencing, when we're in that heart connection space, when we're accessing compassion and when we're willing to be creative. So, yes, we still have that. Um, very, we have all the training and we can access those things, but it's like pulling a book off of a shelf versus being locked inside of the books and feeling like there's one book that you have to reference to find the answer. And the brain, when we're in that creative space of like, oh, I wonder which book to pull off the shelf, or I wonder what's really happening here, does a huge amount of cross-hemispheric connection. And that's part of and foundational in the intuitive process. It's not the only thing that goes into an intuitive process, but doesn't everybody actually want from us as practitioners for us to both know our stuff and also drop in and maybe be able to find the thing? Because I don't know about you, but I see a lot of people, especially historically. I got my start in medicine working with people that had no option. I had just graduated from school, and I was working at that time full time as a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner doing acupuncture and herbs and the like. And I'm seeing people that have been diagnosed with deadly, like fatal diseases, and they have X number of months to live, or they're in extraordinary amounts of pain and nobody's been able to figure out how to help them. So do they really want me to just tell them that there's no hope, or do they want me to go in? Do they want me to do that cross hemispheric connection? Do they want me to dig deep inside of me? And I felt like I don't want to say it's what I owed them from a sense of like heaviness, but isn't that what I signed up for?
Hmm.
Am I not here to actually serve these people that are coming to me, that are trusting me in these ways, and that are searching for something that maybe nobody else has been able to find? Why not now? And really becoming present to that. And that's, I think, how I ended up with, the results that I did and the
Yeah.
rapport with people that I had, because they could feel that care. And to the point that you made about your father and joy, if the medicine that I could administer no matter what is genuine presence and care, I could count on that, right? And sometimes that
Hmm.
alone, I would have people crying, just like, you actually care about me. This still happens today. I can't believe you actually care about me. And it wasn't like I was making some point about that out loud. It's just what they can feel and what's being conveyed. And that's medicine all by itself, right? Even if it doesn't cure the malady,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
medicine.
Oh, and that's taking it from that, like, kind of. I love how you can kind of speak to, and these are the audiences, or like those of us, like the practitioner, and as well just people tuning in who are like, I love to just be able to braid in, like, you have this ability, um, to hold space, support, to provide, scaffolding, to help people come to that place where they can feel like that empathy, and they can feel the support, and they can feel about. But I think there's also this other side, of course, you and Dr. Drew and what you've done with Hold On, and the magnitude to which you work of, helping people rewire. It's not just rewiring nervous systems and rewiring brains. It's like elevating to these different levels of consciousness and awareness. And of course, you've done this with one-to-one, and then groups, and then all of the things you do there. In the,
Yeah.
I know you've had, the corporate world where you've taken companies and you've caused them to rise to way more success and functionality in the world. So there's a we could spend our whole time talking about that. So I want to make sure we don't gloss over that as well, though. To say that you've done so much, and what kind of where I wanted to go, although I'm going to leave it open to you, is like there's that, because I want the magnitude of what you have done to approach and like apprehend people in these levels to where they're high performing. And I don't want to use that word as like a positive thing necessarily, but the kind of people you've had the, and who have had the pleasure to receive from your work are managing and overseeing, like you guys are, quite a lot,
Mhm.
both with the output and with the amount of people they're reaching. And that takes a certain level of, let's just say, ability. But I love how you also, you see this flame within each person, knowing
Yeah.
that each person has this flame of consciousness, intuition, empathic ability that can awaken and can ignite. And so that's like holding two things, right? Because it's like there is this true that everybody can do that and has that ability. And you, I know, are what I know of you, and I'm speaking for you, is that you're on a, like, I can see that you're igniting a lot of flames and increasing and fanning a lot of flames. And then you've also been given quite a large reservoir, quite a dynamic container that you've been able to use and people have been able to benefit from. And so um, I just see that. So it's a really brilliant, cool thing to see that and see what you can hold in terms of space for people in that way, because it's not everybody can do that. And what would you say is your bridge between the two? How does that show up for you? After that, I want to hear more of like how this all started, too.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
for
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think for me, again, it's coming from that whole systems perspective and knowing that two things like the nerdiest of neurosciences or biological sciences can exist concurrently with mysticism or spirituality, and that those two things are not an argument of each other. They actually support one another. I like to talk about that people somehow got this pie chart idea in their head about how life works. So there's the family slice, and then there's the work slice, and then there's the spirituality slice, and all of that. And it's, I mean, I understand it from as a practice or a way of thinking about it, but ultimately it's not the real thing. And that's a perfect example of reductionism. Like,
mm-hmm.
I'm spiritual when I'm at church or when I'm meditating or whatever it is, but it's actually we're constantly these quite spiritual beings, and we can be an atheist and that can still be true, in my opinion. It's just part of the way that the cosmos is designed. Sorry. So knowing that to be true, that's how I've been able to bridge so many different worlds. That's how to be able to hold that loving container for a patient or client, and also be accessing and thinking about their blood work or their brain, or how we can help them in many cases, like you were saying, scale their businesses and fix and heal problems that are existing inside of their businesses so that those businesses can rise. So it seems to make no sense. And by the way, again, just to weave in a little bit of neuroscience stuff, gamma is the frequency of brainwave oscillation that actually helps us to take what seems like two things that can't possibly go together, or a problem that we can't possibly seem to find the answer for, and bring those things together. So it's the bringing together of disparate ideas, things that
Mm,
seem opposite. And right now, I think that our world is really enmeshed in duality. It's either this or it's that. And like, there's a
mm-hmm.
lot of fighting going on. It's not really an optimal way of functioning, and
Mm-hmm.
and finding solutions and collaborating and moving things forward. But I also think that I see quite a lot of people moving into that way of being. But gamma traditionally is very much it's one of the ways of understanding enlightenment or an increase in consciousness. So within the evolutionary scales that maybe, whether we want to talk about it from our ancients or kind of like more modern understandings about what is consciousness, I really want to anchor that word into something that maybe lands as a practicality for practitioners or people who really want to know, like, what's the point of talking about that word? I'm not a monk, or, it seems too
Hmm.
abstract, right?
Yeah.
But consciousness, to some extent, is our ability to have the correct neurological building blocks, including alpha waves and including not having too much noise or static on the line because of overthinking or stress, to where then we are able to have more and more bursts of gamma, because gamma tends to come in short bursts, wherein then we can find the ways that everything is actually interconnected and not in opposition, right?
Mm.
So it's a
Yeah.
very practical and grounded understanding that then helps us, if we were to bring it into the applicability of a moment in time, be able to be present with that patient or client and be able to hold the empathy, presence, and possibility, while we're also kind of, I'll say, subconsciously scanning the library for which book from our clinical training and, and all the didactic training and knowledge that we have at the same time, without feeling a sense of opposition of those two things. And the awareness that we're not stuck inside of one book, whatever our original training is or our original worldview is not the only book we're allowed to read from the rest of our lives, but rather that we have so many, there's an endless library of information that we can choose from on a knowledge basis, and that we can allow for our creative instincts, and for, in that way, that talk about it in terms of neurology, for the gamma to come together via that desire, via that care, via that presence, and also via the not getting inside of the oppositional force inside of us. If we feel tied up in knots, gamma is not going to come. Gamma comes when we are relaxed and yet in a state of desire, right?
Mm. Mm.
So being able to hold all of these things that seem so opposite is, I believe, and, like for you, for instance, you've developed um, and or just innovated within fields of medicine an entirely new way of framing things, and it's changing people's lives, and you have so many people super excited about your work, benefiting from your work, training under your work. And how you got there is this ability to bring together things that don't seem to go together and allow for yourself to explore as a clinician, as a human, into a space. And then this is a legacy that's born, right?
Yeah.
And so when we come to what are we really doing here, not just as practitioners, again, anybody, what are we doing here? Are we designed to be better purchasers within a mechanism of marketing and being kind of seduced by subconscious messages to, perform in a certain way, behave in a certain way, buy in a certain way, think in a certain way? Or are we here to create a legacy and to really live out ourselves, even if what looks like a small legacy? It might be how we are as a parent or how we are as a community member. It doesn't have to be everybody gives birth to a body of work,
Hmm.
but just the feeling of like making life matter, really, really dropping into that space of like, what's possible. So I feel like that's a gift to ourselves to come fully alive, and then it's a surprise what comes through. Like, you didn't probably set out to invent anything new. I don't really know actually your
No,
backstory.
not at all. No way. Um, no, and anything that I've tried to create and invent before that or aside from that, I'm like, no, those like, uh, there's some things, but nothing. Um, the snippet of the story, if you want to say it, is that just like you're saying, with that, I didn't set out to create this way of loosening the floor of the mouth in the whole body because I saw, ooh, there's something there. It was the birth of our oldest almost 9 years ago, born with tongue tie that our midwife spotted, friends of ours knew about, led us on this journey. Okay, whoa, I didn't even know this issue existed. And then I started to do these layers of body work for our little daughter, Serenity. And in that, saw what helped, what didn't. And then all of a sudden, I, did that, seeing it on others and couldn't unsee what I saw in others that was similar to her. And then it spanned into all
Mm,
ages. So, I say that, intuition is one of my greatest teachers. And so was, yes, my daughter, but that interchange of like, so I didn't even have a plan because I didn't know the issue existed. And then it
Right.
was trying to do whatever I could to help her. So, she could have a better experience getting that, oxygen and nutrition, getting the milk she needed with, feeding, and so that my wife would be not as uncomfortable. But so both of them, I was like, how can I help? And then it was very much like survival mode during the time. And then afterwards, I would go through these times, and I've mentioned this, or I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I think um, after that, I started to see a pattern, started to figure out, I see these connections, the floor of the
Mhm.
mouth connected to 70 areas in the body. And I wrote it out time and time again until I saw I'm writing the same thing so many times.
Yeah.
But I think more than that was that's the what, the how or the way was I would just find pockets of time several months apart or every 6 months where I would witness my body moving and doing these techniques with people. And then I would realize that my body was moving without my mind directing me. And it was to a level to which it wasn't just like, ooh, follow my intuition, Neil, dig in deep and see what do I need to do there. And I'll often look out and see clues in the trees, shapes appear in the
Yeah,
trees
yeah, yeah, yeah.
for where I need to go with people. But these times were more like I saw myself doing these things, and it was like 1 or 2 days in a row clinically I saw that. And then after the fact I would look back at all those moments in rehearsal or winding, and I would say, oh, I did that, and that problem that had never been able to be solved until I did 10 visits, we solved it in 2 visits or one.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I started to look back and reverse engineer what was happening in those moments. um, and then I realized sooner and sooner into those times when they would happen to let go, to not cognitively process, because I would, in a way, get in the way of what my body was already moving in, tapping into that things that existed, that knowledge that existed that I could just go and partake in. So, yeah, for me, it was in one way I didn't create anything new. I uncovered what was there, so I feel like this precious reality in the is because I couldn't have made that up. One of those things.
Right, totally. It came through you as you were inside of that space of service and of showing up. And that's, I feel like that's the way that we're designed to live, is kind of like letting more things pleasantly surprise us,
Hmm.
because you were still landing inside of the safety of, you weren't going to do any harm. You're
Yeah,
not going to suddenly do something to somebody's mouth that hurts them,
yeah.
right? So you're just exploring and then innovating within that, and it's brilliant. Yeah, I would say that's a lot of how my path went too. So when I graduated from Chinese medicine school, to your point, it wasn't as credible because back then they didn't offer a doctorate.
Hmm.
And what I found is that I was, quite young and put out my own shingle, and people were coming to me, like I said, with really intense life situations and health labels, I like to call them rather than diagnoses.
Yeah.
So health labels, and it's like, oh wow, okay, yeah, I know that not only was I not trained in a way that could possibly heal or help this person, but that there's not a body of medicine that is at least popularly understood that knows how to help or heal this person right now. And so it's a very humbling thing, and I found my way through, right? And so to
Mm.
some extent, and it was super helpful in the beginning that I had license to palpate and touch people's bodies,
Yeah.
because I feel like that as I was, let's say I was putting in needles, I would start to just talk with them a little bit more deeply about what was going on in their life. And then I would come to these places where, they're coming in for back pain. And I'm like, I really have to talk to you about your marriage though. Or like, you know, and then, and then a lot of the times the words that I was using and the presence that I had would actually start a big crying release from the patient, and then I'm like, whoa, this is amazing. And I started to skip the needles and just put my hands on, somebody's ankles or whatever, and then go into prayer. And they didn't necessarily know that. I was working under the
Hmm.
cover of like, oh, they have needles in, and now it just looks like I'm maybe, pressing on their kidney one on the sole of their feet bilaterally, right? Like it could be
Yeah.
all very scientifically explained, and I could be a little undercover. And in the meantime, maybe some massive energetic shift would happen to them that I knew wasn't the needles. Or maybe I would be given words to say that ended up being the most potent medicine that they could have received, and it's a feeling of like my life before that message was delivered and my life after for the patient,
Mm.
right? I'm not in charge of this. I'm here and I'm going to spend time with this person. So getting out of the way. And so what ended up happening is over the course of years, I stopped working as much with the needles and the herbs and like I'll say holding up the props.
Mm-hmm.
Those were extremely important things and I'm so grateful for my training. Just like you said with your doctorate of chiropractic, it's foundational information, and being a doctor doesn't work without being a doctor in that regard, right? Like you just like for me, I couldn't imagine not having that level of skill and training. But what ended up happening was that I became so fascinated by the results that I was getting, that where it wasn't about the needles, where it wasn't about my intellect or my ability to refer out. I mean, of course, I'm going to still refer out if there's a medical referral needed.
Yeah.
But the stuff that I thought that I was preparing myself for in school ended up falling away. And I ended up just being the person that kind of like worked as an oracle. And people would come with all kinds of problems. And one of the things that I learned very early on is that if you can name the root cause, the emotional or spiritual reason the body is having pathology, the body typically unwinds its pathology either spontaneously or let's say 5 times faster,
Yeah.
twice as fast, right? And in the meantime, the patient's experience of reality is like, whoa, my whole life frame has shifted and I now see a path through, or I understand my son, or whatever it is, right? So when I just kept on focusing on that, I ended up working with um, more and more people who are in leadership roles. So my path to being an executive coach, which is kind of a funny word for me since I'm deeply spiritual, but I
Right.
indeed coach executives, and I don't mean necessarily for small companies. Like, my first CEO or one of the first, not the first, but one of my first CEOs was running a $3 billion company. Like, this is not a small
Yeah.
company. It's not small stakes. Okay. So here's what's interesting. I don't have an MBA. I don't have any particular business experience at that point. How am I helping these people? Because I'm leveraging that place of if I do no harm and I'm fully present, what do I know? How
Yeah.
can I help? How do I serve? And I just kept on realizing that I could solve systems problems inside of a human body using Chinese medicine, but that I had that same capacity to solve inside of organizations in industries that I don't understand, because I can understand where pathology is and what possibility there is inside of that ecosystem. If I
Yeah.
bring the individual or the organization to its wellness, what I found is, gee, I can probably triple, even for companies that have been around for decades, I can triple their top line in a matter of a couple of years if they'll listen to me, if they'll
Mm.
implement, if they'll work toward health and what's possible rather than staying inside of broken frameworks and models and normalizing pathology. So I can translate all of these things into business speak. And for a long time, I was like an undercover double agent working in corporate environments, wildly spiritual, and just
Yeah.
making sure that I translated it to their language. So that was great experience for me, and I'm grateful that I've since then kind of come out of the closet and am willing and able to talk more about the spirituality aspect more openly. Um, but it was also a good experience just to realize that intuition is really my most powerful skill set. And
Mm.
I lean on knowledge, and I'm careful to do no harm. Um, but that's the main framing and tool that I've utilized. Um, and
And
then go ahead.
could you tell me just you were practicing Chinese medicine. Where were you? Was that SoCal or where were
It
you
was.
elsewhere?
Yeah,
Okay.
until just recently. I've always lived in Southern California.
So
So
always there.
I
Okay.
went to school in San Diego and I for grads, for medical school, and then I stayed And so I started there, and yeah, it was later in Southern California, in San Diego, that I met my neurosciences colleague.
Okay.
So that part actually began formally as a part of my career about 14 years ago in partnership with him. Um, although it's just like what you were saying about molecular biology, and then you needed to change gears. So I started studying neurosciences when I was just turned 18 years old. When I was a complete atheist, just for in case, I don't know if you knew that I used to be an atheist. If any listener
Mm-mm.
is like, is this woman off her rocker with the woo stuff? I used to be a total atheist. And then I had a really profound, unexpected, unexplained spiritual experience. And in that moment, I knew there was a God. And I knew that my prior theory that if we understood neurotransmitters, we could understand human reality was
Mm-hmm.
completely flawed. And
Mm-hmm.
that no science would ever be able to catch up with, there's just no way to possibly explain all of the actual phenomena in the world, in reality, with science, because we are limited humans doing our best to rationalize and understand, and we're really slow even with AI. I feel like it's a slow way of understanding what is actually out there, what how we actually operate. So anyway, yeah, my the neurosciences part started when I was down in Southern California as well. And um, when I quite serendipitously ended up working in the same office space as my colleague Dr. Drew Pierson, I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand what neurofeedback therapy was about.
Mm-hmm.
um, so received quite an education and working side by side with him. It was incredible.
And that was kind of like you talked about going from working as with Chinese medicine with needles and then without them, and then you went from that to like shifting into executive coaching, and then so that was all happening like down there in San Diego,
Hmm.
essentially.
Hmm.
And then did that cross over with when you met Dr. Drew, and kind of was that where some of the executive coaching started? And can you kind of paint the picture on the timeline there?
Yeah, sure. I had been doing executive coaching and I'll say spiritual guidance kind of behind the scenes with some pretty profound leaders. And when I started to work with him, um, it was in a brick and mortar practice. And so we ended up realizing that we both had a lot of shared um, perspectives, right? Like much like you and I, like just um, out of the box thinking and riffing
Mm-hmm.
and feeling into and exploring, as people, but also as clinicians. And so we were both very interested in consciousness. Like what actually, like the brain is not the generator of consciousness; it's maybe a tool inside of consciousness. So what is it?
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know that I still have an answer for that. I think that's the great mystery of life. But we definitely have a lot more understandings about the tool of the brain. And we were also both very interested in leadership. And we both also understood, and we both had this feeling from many decades, like back when we were basically kids ourselves, that we were born into a time here on Earth that was going to be the tipping point place, right? Like I knew from a very young age that we would be facing ecological and sociological crises in this lifetime that could wipe out and decimate our species, which is basically where we're at if we look at
Mm-hmm.
it. So, um, it's not a small project. It's not like how do we make a marginally better clinical experience for our clients or patients. It's like, all right, so if we know that we've got to thread the needle, and we know that we're probably one of the few people, relatively proportionally speaking, that's thinking about this, because this was again 14, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing about it?
Yeah.
So we started to innovate, and the leaders that were coming to see him or were coming to see me, we started to refer back and forth to each other, and then create a shared knowledge set with their permission, of course. Because when I could understand what was going on with the neurology of my clients, I could help them deeper, and I could also explain to him in much greater color things that the client couldn't say for themselves about what it was that was really kind of like the nature of who they are, or what the depth of their soul was really desiring in life. Right? They might come in and be able to kind of rudimentary, like, I'd like to sleep better and be less cranky with my wife, and I'm like, yeah, this is
Mm-hmm.
what they're really up to, and and corroborating with the client, of course. So what we saw was really huge synergistic results. And also, as a part of this, Dr. Drew Pierson started to study my brain. And basically, neurofeedback therapy has been around since the 1960s, and it's been studied in Harvard and Stanford and all the places with big pedigree. But typically, what they study is pathology. We're not surprised.
Right.
And typically, or they'll study in theory, right? They don't have clinical applications per se, or the clinical application is done inside of the myopism of a particular study run by people who don't have clinical practices. So what we were starting to notice is this robust system of interconnections, and kind of like what you were saying, like, oh, wait a minute, how do I perceive this particular individual, and how do I get them faster results? And then how do you from there basically use that as a pilot study to reverse engineer a theory? And then how do you take that theory and compare it to what you've seen come out of Harvard? And then how do you build on that so that then you have an even improved theory? And then you basically take that next, relevant, you're not just randomly applying this stuff, relevant clinical application as yet another pilot study to further develop um, this understanding. So essentially, what ended up happening is that um, we ended up creating together a really deep and complex understanding of wisdom and leadership skills and consciousness skills and even intuition skills. And a lot of how that happened was that he would experiment on me. And I don't mean
Mm-hmm.
that in a bad way. I have extraordinary capacity with the intuition and just the way that my neurology is formed and works on an EEG level, on an electrical study of my brain. I'm very, very anomalous. And part of that anomaly makes me able to name what's happening. And so, finding my way through various massive intuitive growth spurts, and also just being able to have him try out something that, again, he's reading. We know it's a clinically effective and safe tool because of this body of research that exists from these, like all the other people that have passed down in their clinical practices, or the research coming out of these institutions. But the way that we were applying it was not traditional, right? And we were getting incredible results, including helping people, including myself, to grow in their intuitive capacity, to be able to grow in their empathy, to be able to grow in their ability to achieve states of awareness that help them to solve bigger and bigger problems. So to us, this was the biggest leverage that we could possibly manage, is how do we change the neurology and also the hearts and minds of the world's most powerful and impactful pioneers and visionaries and creators, so that we can all thread the needle and make it through this time period and come into something that's actually beautiful and maybe can't even be perceived by the ordinary person right now as a possibility, or couldn't be executed against as a plan of action, because this isn't just philosophy. We have to actually create a new reality here. We're being asked by the soup of everything that's happening to create another framework for reality. So we've been working towards that, and basically creating mapping and understanding how that represents neurologically into the brain, and also helping people to lay down new neural architecture to support that for 14 years. And it's
Yeah.
been an
Well,
incredible journey.
yeah, that's so many layers there of like well, first of all, just to see the way that the synergy of you two, that blossomed. And you both, well, you have such that waxing into the neuroscience and understanding the very Kinsey mysterious way that our brains and our bodies work and our whole beings can function. And obviously, then you have these similar but different invisible matters like the intuitive and the empathic realm, where we um, we can see, through the trajectory that you talked about, you were not only were you know experiencing these um, measurements, these processes, like Dr. Drew clearly, I know I've seen some of this in some of what I've read and followed your work for a while, is that measuring your brain with such high capacity, and then it's like you would have to have this capacity in order for him to test out some of these theories, even though they're not theories. And then so what a wild experiment in one way, that you offered yourself as the test subject, obviously to a reliable, credible person,
Totally.
and through these experiences you were able to build together. It's kind of like you offered yourself and your brain and your body, and you were able to then also critically analyze, and both of you were able to form something that clearly is part of this, if you want to call it this toolkit of getting through this event horizon in time and space, where we're, like you said, facing some of the convergence of a lot of challenges in broad scale. I think macro to the micro. I don't. It's an oversaid kind of phrase, but I mean, you have this macro level of where you both are looking, and then you have a very micro level to looking down at these very, very um, small areas, relatively speaking, of the brain and how
Yes.
it works. And that right there is like how you can see the broadest and the most infinitesimal kind of picture. So in there you have another range of like, how do you traverse, how do you bridge, how do you connect? Well, somebody who's connecting those things, I would imagine you're going to see some patterns, you're going to see some. But I kind of want, there's a whole rabbit hole I was going down there with my thoughts. I'm like, oh, that's fascinating to think about. But I kind of want to go back to something that maybe help kind of frame up the undergirding structure from which you entered into all this. And that's, I told you that my excitement right now is just in the latest that I've seen, even this podcast evolve, is I really want to get down to these parts that I call the personal legend, to borrow from Paulo Coelho, his book, The Alchemist, and part of where this title came from, even though it's much more than just alchemy of turning lead into gold. It's, taking people from compromised to alchemized, but it's not just people, it's the planet, it's the
Mhm.
systems, it's the way. And in that, it's Santiago the shepherd finds through the wisdom that he surrounds himself with or is surrounded by to encounter what his personal legend is. And for, those who are tuning in that don't know that term, it's somebody's destiny, what's written on their heart, their scroll, their not their goals and their tasks, but this deep essence of who they are and what they are to do in this place on this time that we have in. So with you, kind of like, I'd love to know, when did you come in contact with what you feel is your personal legend? What is it? And can you share more about like how you came about that and how that influences what you're doing right now and facing to the future as well with what you're ongoing?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful question, and I think that we've touched on it some, but just to carry the thread through, I feel like that I've always wanted to be able to serve and to help. It's just like I'm an Enneagram 2 for anybody that knows Enneagram.
Mm,
Like I'm very much that persona. But I had the misconception of not being very useful, having a lot of self-doubt, not knowing if I was intelligent or not, like all the kind of things like that. And I feel like that I call it my big bang moment, when I was 18 and I had a very profound spiritual awakening, mystical experience happen. I basically knew that I didn't know.
mm,
And it was like, okay, so getting uncomfortable with knowing that we don't know or that we can't possibly know everything that there is to know. I feel like that really changed something. And I've been living into that. Maybe the whole through line of what I've been describing is what is the actual truth? And I mean truth with a capital T, not like what's trending right now in medicine or what's on social media or something like that. But like, what is that deepest fundamental truth? And knowing that if we lean into that, even if we don't have really solid answers, that that's our ultimate in freedom. And so I would say, like, if there's 2 words written on my heart, well, maybe there's gotta be 3. One of them would be love for sure,
mm,
and then the other ones would be truth and then freedom. And
wow.
I feel like freedom in a way oscillates with love as, like, that penultimate word, because I feel like that within freedom the truth of the real expression of freedom, it's all love anyways. So I feel like that these words are, they have relationships to each other. But the destiny that is written in my heart is to be a courageous, I don't know, warrior sounds like I'm fighting something and I'm not. It to be somebody who walks this path very courageously, because there's a lot of skepticism, there's a lot of reductionism, there's a lot of stuff out there that's maybe really not working for us. And I would say it's up to me. The challenge that I gave myself is, how dare I be small when I'm sitting
Mm,
with these patients in my first year or two of practice. It was like, how dare I be small? Because in my smallness, I'm taking from them, and I refuse to do that. Right.
yeah.
And so what I know is that it's been a courageous path. It's not easy to talk about. It's like being out of the closet for being kind of woo or intuitive inside of a community, or inside of the global atmosphere of the intellectual and the data and the science are gods. And I would say that we're praying to false prophets when we pray to the science god or to the data god. And I say that having done an ample amount of research, and having in my undergraduate, I was setting up to study the brain and behavior, cognitive psychology, for the rest of my life as a researching professor. I'm not anti any of these things, and I don't want to
Sure.
be misperceived in that way, but rather just, it's not possible for us to just think that that's enough, because it's not. And we don't have enough time to figure it out the hardcore science way, where it takes like millions or hundreds of millions of dollars and a really, really freaking long time. We don't have that kind of time right now as a planet and as a species. So how do we lean into maybe something that's a little more extraordinary? How do we lean into, as long as we are doing no harm, more creative applications and explorations into the what's possible? So I feel like that in some ways it's felt like I'm a sacrificial lamb for this,
Mm.
and in some ways it's felt like I'm a pioneer. But mostly I've shifted it. I've mostly been able to hold it as it's positive, but it's been a tricky thing, because when I started on a spiritual path, it was 30 years ago, and it wasn't trendy.
Hmm.
It was not well thought of, and it was actually really hard to find stuff on it, because the internet wasn't there yet. I mean, it's been a minute. um, but I think, as another part that I want to just touch on with all of that, when I first met Dr. Drew Pierson and I didn't understand what neurofeedback therapy was, I actually ended up having him help my sister, who had had a massive neurological accident at that very moment in our lives. Um, she had imbibed in a small amount of THC with friends at a college party. She's much younger than I am, and so she was in college at that time when I was already a professional, and she basically had sensory processing disorder, to the point that she couldn't talk or function. She wasn't able to feed herself, and she was 19 years old, and she would have been
Mm.
disabled probably for the rest of her life. That's what I was told by the smartest of neurologists. So again, inside of that innovation and inside of risk taking, and what it is that that I was talking about, like, where's real truth and real freedom, and how do I fully express love? Those words written on my heart. I brought my sister to him, and within a couple of weeks, she was coming back. And she ended up re-enrolling back into school, finishing her master's degree, writing a book. She's awesome. And I don't think that she would have made it through all of that. There was no answer in modern medicine except for Xanax to
Mm.
medicate her so that she was numb to the pain that she was in. Um, and it was not mental illness, not that it matters. But I was like, is this schizophrenia? And everybody was very clear. No, this is a sensory processing disorder. And I'm like, how do I solve for that at this scale? I felt so under equipped. Um, so there's been a lot of personal touch to the neurosciences and the neurofeedback therapy that's really impacted my life through her. But also part of how it is, in full honesty and transparency and vulnerability, how it was that I ended up um, offering myself up so deeply as that test subject, because I hadn't really done a lot of training. So this wasn't a neurosciences induced thing. But when I was moving through a really profound time of intuitive skills coming forward, I was in a lot of emotional pain. I was still a high functioning, executive coach and strategic advisor and single mom. And like, I was able to do all the things, but internally I was in a lot of pain because my senses were opening kind of too fast. And so that's actually a part of how we learned to work with all of this and the inspiration. So much like you developed a body of medicine in part because of your daughter, Dr. Drew and I were friends and colleagues, and he's like, I have to help you. We have
Yeah.
to get you through this discomfort that you're having. And in that, we ended up trying, like I said, those we knew they were safe and effective, but how do we apply things in a different way? Body work was always safe and effective. You just applied it in a different way. He applied the neurosciences in a different way, and that's how we ended up really. He's the neuroscientist of our team for sure. I speak enough neurosciences to be, quasi fluent, but um, he we ended up creating this body of medicine that doesn't exist outside of our practice from necessity, and from that place of like, he there was a way that he was as a clinician and as a friend that's like, I've got you, we're going to figure this out. And it ended up being, huge gifts that were coming through that I've been able to help tons of people with. So it ends up being a great story. It ends
Yeah.
up being a beautiful journey. But in those moments, sometimes, and I think that's in that alchemist kind of inspired way, is like, we don't always understand our path. I would not have ever imagined that my career would end up having all these layers to it. I didn't think I was intuitive, by the way. I thought I had a big imagination when I was a kid.
Mm.
That's what I thought. So we don't really know. We can't. We haven't read the end of our book yet,
Mm-hmm.
right? The book of our life. And so just to be able to show up inside of the wonder and the mystery and really invest and give to our lives as an expression, as beauty, as art, as an offering, to ourselves and to the world around us. Like, I think to me, that is truth, that is freedom, that is love, and that is what is written on my heart.
Wow, it's beautiful, and also feel the power of that coming through, of like the courageousness that you had to, you know, go from somebody who thought you had just a furtive imagination to then now, you know, and I know that in some of what we shared, you've and as one would imagine, like you couldn't get to where you are right now without you've had to navigate through stress and conflict and challenge, and you spend time with patients, and then you've coaching not just people but corporations. Like, you've clearly had to navigate through some really, I'm sure, tenuous, stressful situations that required of you to be courageous about who you are and
Yeah.
to persist through, and so that you would not have that flame snuffed out, because clearly, no matter how big a flame is, like, I could, and maybe this is the thing, is like some people, like your sister, right? I mean, like, no matter how big someone's flame is, if nobody's there, if somebody isn't there to just help uncover, and so you were there as an instrumental person along with Dr. Drew, just to revitalize and awaken,
Hmm.
and some people don't have that or haven't found that yet. You've made it through to not only let your light shine so brightly, but to make it, I see like that heart of love that you just yearn for people to awaken to their awareness of what they can do and who they can be, because it is such a beautiful, chain reaction, such a beautiful, I just get the picture of like a sparkler, that this little girl has a sparkler, a little person has a sparkler on the 4th of July, and you can light a lot of sparklers with one sparkler, and
Yeah.
then those sparklers can light a lot of this sparklers, and that's a lot of bright light and spark and shine, and that's so potent, because you illuminate what is dark for someone to where and that's to go back to a phrase that I've seen you put into a lot of different phrases within what we've talked about, is presence, but then also you look at someone's pathology, but possibility. I love
Always.
that word of
Yeah.
possibility that you have, and when someone says a word, and it's not just the word, it's what you believe about that word, and it's what you bring into this world. That when I hear you say the word possibility, it's like that sprouts, people like it would sprout a flower,
Yeah.
and that gives life to that very, concept too that you're talking about. So,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you first of
Yeah.
all for being courageous through that all, and then also just how much you look at this as a place of possibility when we can be in this time of constriction and contraction, because that can be overwhelming. So I just imagine some people too are feeling the hope and the burgeoning and the
Mm.
possibility from your words and what you carry. So I'm excited because I just think I wonder what some people will see when they look through this lens now. And any more that you have to share on that, I would love. But
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just to throw a few more things into the pot, you might perceive my point of view is because it must have been easy or whatever. And I actually, starting at 2 weeks old, had massive health issues. Like I would say, I didn't know what it was like to feel well for more than a day or maybe even a day in my life until I was in my mid 30s. And I had all kinds of big label stuff like Lyme and chronic fatigue and autoimmune stuff that didn't even have good labels or definitely not good treatments. Um, and it's been a challenging path just on a physiological health, brain fog, you name it, kind of every system in my body. At the point when I had that big bang spiritual awakening, the reason that it happened, I think, is because I counted at that time there were 7 systems of my body that were basically just absolutely bottoming out, and I didn't know how to get through it. So I think that sometimes we have to hit a bottom before we can find a different way,
mhm,
or be open, right? And so part of what I love to teach is like maybe we don't have to have it like really be that horrible, right? Maybe we can find possibility before it's crisis,
mhm,
or maybe we're at a collective crisis and it's a good time to find possibility. Either way you look at it, but I would say also there was a lot of trauma and there was a lot of adversity that I walked through, not just in my childhood, but in my early adulthood. And so really it is a life story of turning the lemons into lemonade and um, continuing forward. And I speak that not to toot my own horn, but just to be able to broaden the perspective on the very thing that you were describing, and um, I feel like that so much of what I see in people who are seasoned professionals of whatever walk of life is they'll say, but I have my home, I have to look over the kids, I have to make a certain amount of money, I have to please my boss, I have to stay within my licensure, I have to whatever. And there's all these rules that basically are just desiring to be broken or softened, not in ways that hurts anyone, but where we actually are allowing ourselves to reframe what it is that we stand for or what it is that we're willing to take risks on. And I think that that's the true, like, that's that essence of aliveness, is like being in connection, being in love, in loving relationship with ourselves and with others, and also just being willing to take those risks, because otherwise we're sort of dead and just plodding our way through life and missing so much of the real juice of it.
yeah, that's good. That's good. We don't want that.
No.
We don't want that. We want the nectar of that, flowing life of connection, and also, yeah, just the well, that thank you for explaining that too. I appreciate that. I don't think I knew to the extent like what you had gone through in those early years. Um and that paints, I think, even a more of a picture of like where you came from. And I think in that is like, because I said personal legend, but you gave a big um look into that. And I think that's kind of the goal, is like you can tell like someone has you have this mission, goal, destiny, and some of that, you can see where you've come from and what you've gone through and where you were able to break free from, escape velocity from a situation that could render people just unable to accomplish just being free, let alone helping to lend that to others. um, and inevitably you have taken that into a outward facing, not ignoring yourself, but outward facing um, stance of, like, what can you do to promote this life around you. It's interesting. It reminds me of this. One of the most poignant things I've heard in these whispers from God is back when I lived in Illinois, and it was right before I moved to California. I mean, and it was just this simple phrase of "Have you watered my children lately?" And
Mm.
I'll never forget that because you know, in that moment, I remember, ooh, you're talking about these several people that I knew in Illinois. They weren't children, they were fellow people that,
Right.
that I was supposed to water. And then to California, moving there back in 2000 and, 9, 10, there were others and more and more. And that has never left me, that I have this privilege of getting to water others. So I know that you've got this, I just see what do you call that? A watering pot where you're just tipping it over and you're watering these beautiful flowers that are people blossoming, burgeoning, that possibility word. Um, so it's so great that you're holding this massive reservoir of water to sprinkle it on and over people, because clearly we all need it, and it's refreshing. And I think you said it earlier too, is you with how I think you said this towards yourself, but you said, how dare I be small, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're taking, but rather, how big or how much can I give? How much can you offer, Amy? And that's clearly you've overflown so much in your life, and I felt the benefit of that. I can see, like, that's just the nature of who you are. And so even kind of for my sake, to pin the personal legend comment of like, um so much of who you are is to exude your essence, and like that what you've been given to create that burgeoning around you. Um so maybe I'll ask this question in a way that you can direct and steer how you want, but are there, I know you're situating in a new land, where you live now, and it's beautiful Nevada, that I've heard about, seen. I've never been to that part of Nevada, and I'm eager to visit you and come see it. But I know from your description and seeing some pictures, that's the land. But I'm talking about horizons and where you are. Um, is there any way do you see, as you look ahead and wade through, do you see you um, showing like the reservoir of water that you have and where it spills? Is it just continuing to expand? Are you continuing to see more and more people? I just saw you on in knowing you and seeing your, I was excited to see you on Luke Story's podcast, and how here's some about his experience with you. And he reaches a lot of people as well, so I just think you're trickling, this trickle effect is really beautiful. Are there any things where you're looking into different ways in your expansion and with all you're doing? Like, I'm asking, so I'll be way more finite. In a year, in two, like, do you see
Mm.
yourself in a different way, a different mode, a different capacity, a different container, or is it very much expanding what you're doing? And what does that look like, if you can offer?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for your excitement. I can feel you rooting me on. It's one of I love that in our connection and our friendship. Um, I would say that the work is always continuing to evolve. And that as much as I talk about and inspire other people to continue to evolve their work, to some extent, I don't feel like I have that much choice with mine, because I've noticed that I'm not happy at the same level. Like, I feel the constriction if I don't allow it to move through me. And so I've surrendered to that, right? I don't necessarily want to have people. Um, there's nothing in me that wants to be famous or like get on bigger and bigger platforms so that I can have more, uh, I don't know, sense of ego strokes or whatever. My desire is to be able to impact and influence, hundreds of millions of people in my lifetime, whether that's with my presence as I sit in a closed room with one person, and then the ripple effect that comes to that one person, or whether it's me speaking and teaching more publicly. So I would say that it's shifting. I would say that the clients that I'm working with are on bigger and bigger platforms and or positions of power, and that I feel like I've had to overcome any of my feelings of deficiency or doubt over the decades. And I'm definitely in this place of like, wait, I actually am tooled to help some of the most key people in the world to be able to do their lives, to be able to act in a place of liberation and freedom and clarity and wisdom in those positions of authority, so that they can serve the hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions of people, or however many people they touch. So I feel like that the type of people is evolving. Um, I feel like I'm being invited to more and more stages to speak and teach. I feel like that the world is more ready. A
Mhm.
lot of this, I've been ready in so many ways, and I think that it's a COVID and kind of the this year and some of the years in between, of course, have kind of cracked people open so that they're maybe ready to hear, and so that's changing things as well, like that receptivity. But I want to continue to be brought in to some of the most important places I think that are happening right now, which are a lot of these international communities of people who are getting together to solve for the biggest problems that we have, the biggest existential threats, whether that's environmental, political, it could be food and water supply, it could be education. And I'm really enjoying being able to utilize my skill set and my presence to be able to help solve for problems that technically fall outside of my domain, and or just to help to harmonize, because one thing that I also love to do is to harmonize groups of leaders so that they realize the places they're all saying the same thing, so that they waste less time pretending to
Mhm.
argue when they're saying the same thing,
Yeah.
and really move the field of coherence amongst these really big powerhouses where they're no longer worried about impressing each other or trying to be hierarchical, but rather be deeply collaborative. So I love being able to participate in creating those fertile grounds for these really brilliant minds that are subject matter experts to be able to work together and find the solutions. And I haven't highlighted it, but I've done a large amount of pro bono work in the environmental space, just because I know if we don't take care of Mother Earth, we're not going to be here very long. And because I love her, that, I can say that I really believe, after talking and being in and amongst these environments and in these conversations with these global thought leaders, that we really do have all of the solutions we need, and or they're readily available to be able to solve all of these existential problems, all of these things that we have gone along inside of pathology for decades or hundreds of years or thousands of years. We actually have the ability, the technology, the know-how, and it's just learning how to collaborate. It's learning how to bring these conversations together and see sameness and be able to take things that look opposite and have enough gamma going on, and have enough
Mhm.
um, ego dissolution in those moments to be able to see through. And I'm very deeply inspired by that. And that's, I yes, I have a practice, and we have some of these leaders come and participate in our on-site intensives to rewire their brain, and to fall deeper into their spiritual path and their understanding about life, and how the intricate and beautiful place that they are designed to live from and be a part of all of life. But it's more than just selling those seats, and I guess that's probably clear based on what I've said. It's really, how do we move together as a collective towards this bigger and more beautiful outcome than maybe we've ever allowed ourselves to dream, and definitely more than what we've allowed ourselves to have, in maybe in recorded history even. And so I'm really working towards that, and writing more and teaching more in ways that maybe have nothing to do per se with my practice, and but are everything about the greater mission of really uplifting humanity, and getting us through this really interesting event horizon, as you called it.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really, yeah, so profound. And just, the way that you're exuding that, life force and essence and personal legend, and this strong provocation to like improve life, brighten it. And of course, you're kind of getting to these spheres and with people and with thought leaders or with the global structures that, there is like a pathway towards, braiding together, and synthesizing. Like you said, you can see something in a way that you bring even leaders together and find what can seem disparate but can actually seem interwoven, interconnected, and interdependent. And I think that's a beautiful uh, gift, amongst the many that you have, is taking, if somebody was creating this painting or a mosaic or whatever fabric or medium you want to talk about, it's like, I think that's also like the maker in you, is to um, nurture and co-nurture and help people see what we have for each other. um, and I think that's the word of possibility as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned in there some of the um, ways. I just want to mention too, like, I know people, if you already haven't come across, if they've not come across your work, they can come to partake in what experiences you all have. There's also remote work and virtual work, and I know there's a lot of ways people could, be inspired, on this broad sense, this clarion and halcyon call. I think that this message, like, I feel it within me, and also I'm really excited that you can do this, like, to help people, and that there is, you've provide ways that people can work with you. um, and yeah, so we'll have, some of that very clearly in our show notes and all of those things. But what's a two things I'd love, if you've already said so much, so is there anything else you feel like you any more water to sprinkle on people, me included? No, and then no, but more focusing on others. I don't want to be selfish, but then again, right, I need it. So but any more water to sprinkle, and um, how would you kind of call people or beckon anybody who you feel there might be something to being able to, because I feel like it's such a privilege to be able to have you with what you offer, to that you are available for people to learn from. So I'm like, ooh, I need to make sure I find some time with you. So tell us anything more. Sprinkling water, ways people can find you, things like that.
Yeah, totally. And I just first wanted to start with, it's been an honor to be on the show with you and to be engaged in this conversation. And thank you for the way that you helped to elicit the information and how you helped to flow and respond to it, because it's been really lovely and I very much enjoyed it. I have the opportunity to be on a lot of podcasts. This one's been
Mhm.
really fun. So, I mean, I would say, for people to understand that although I'm speaking in terms of global leaders, sometimes people don't recognize that of themselves. Sometimes they don't understand that what it is that they're pioneering wants to turn into what it wants to turn into. So
Mhm.
it's, although I'm tooled for, and so is my colleague, to work with the brightest and most brilliant minds in the world. Oftentimes the most bright and brilliant are the most also humble and don't necessarily know that about themselves. So, regardless of whether someone feels like it's a fit, I just offer that as an offering, because, again, I didn't think I was intuitive, nor did I think I was smart.
Mhm.
So, I just want to make sure people get that they may not get about themselves what their true capacity is, and potentially how they are a fit, for what it is that we offer in that regard as well, if that were to resonate. We bring people on site. I'll just give like a one sentence for each thing. One thing that we offer is we bring people on site and we literally hook their brains up to neurofeedback therapy. And we do an electrical study and EEG, and then change their brains radical amounts in a short period of time toward wisdom and consciousness and leadership traits. We also handle pathology like sleep problems and ADD and things like that. Everybody's got a little something going on under the hood, and we can handle that. But again, it's what's possible. So that was more than one sentence, but it's hard to explain. Neurofeedback therapy is real-time EEG electrical study of the brain that's fed into a computer and then fed back to the brain faster than the mind can perceive, that changes how the brain shapes, and massively increases neuroplasticity. So we can achieve pretty much any outcome that can be described. We can achieve. So it's pretty amazing what the scope is of that, of the expression of that medicine. Um, People can work with me online on Zoom ongoingly. Sometimes I offer an occasional one-time session as well if somebody doesn't feel like they have the full capacity to show up on a regular basis, or that's not what they're looking for. I like to meet people, and it's fun to occasionally work with someone. Although most of my one-on-one clients I've been working with for many months or years, and it just continues to open up. Um, Inside of that, it can be executive coaching and strategic advising, but obviously done in quite a different way. And it can also be kind of a one-on-one intuition. How, like, for instance, how do you lead your $300 million business in an intuitive way as a conscious leader? And really where the rubber meets the road, how do you interact with your managers? How do you, develop new products, like everything kind of in the scope of that. And then I also offer what I call a modern mystery school, which, if you've understood and enjoyed what it is that I'm describing here, it's as equally practical as that. It just goes a lot deeper into how I see, let's say, the physiology of the self, and how the self then interacts with the all that is and is intrinsically a part of the all that is. So it's a very global perspective, but it's also very much rooted into reality. And I say this like kind of mischievously, like I tend to trick a lot of overly analytical adults into being clairvoyant and capable of doing healings that they don't think that they could do, by helping them remember their childlike nature. I don't mean it like
Mm,
I'm tricking anyone really, but
yeah, no,
but
that
it,
makes sense.
it's a playful yet profound exploration, and that happens online. And then we can also invite people in person for an optional in person um, retreat. And I think you also threw in there, is there anything last that I wanted to speak to? Oh, and I do teaching and facilitating around the world for other organizations. And as far as anything else that I would want to speak to that I didn't get a chance to yet, any state of reality that we have experienced or can experience can be mapped to the brain electrically. And so, therefore, we don't have to have permission to be able to have an experience, because if we need to have data or know that data can exist to explain it, then we have permission to go ahead and feel all kinds of things and have all kinds of things happen. But also just that we can understand, like, if we have a propensity toward overthinking and ruminating or worrying about what other people are perceiving about us, or just feeling like we can't get off that hamster wheel, or we're feeling blocked, or we're, whatever it is, there is a neurological correlation. There is an electrical pattern in the brain. And when somebody that's really skilled, such as my colleague or other people that are in the field, look at a brain, they can tell so much. With my colleague, he takes it to the next level. Like, you have dyslexia, but for letters and not for numbers, and also you have an early childhood wound with your mother that is not fully resolved, and you have low grade PTSD, but you wouldn't know that because you also have higher than normal intellect.
Mm,
So it is a profound thing, and I just want people, even though it's not really the topic that we've been on today, to understand themselves as those walking, living, breathing miracles, and that there is a reason, and that sometimes we can feel stuck inside of a pathology or inside of a way of being or a frame of who we think we are. And we actually can see that mirrored into the brain and the way that the brain is functioning. And so hopefully we can, because we all know those places that we might get stuck on, or we haven't been able to overcome, and just to be able to understand that there's something very physiological happening. It's electrical, but it's electrophysiology, and that we can change that, and that neuroplasticity is real, and that whether people ever come through our programs or ever, hear me speak again or do more research on this on their own, just to remember that the brain is actually quite magical, and that who we are is actually very miraculous, and that anything is possible, and we can overcome and rewrite anything that is not real about ourselves, because we mostly live inside of illusions about ourselves and others and how the world works, and continue to find that truth and freedom and joy that comes from really knowing who we are and being able to express ourselves in the fullest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Really wonderful. I like all of what you said. And then you said I took from it these three key words: magical, miraculous, and possible. These are the ways that you imbue what you imbue in others. Like, their brains are magical, life can be miraculous, and then, this possible realm. So,
Yeah. And there's the data to prove it.
yeah,
Like,
there you
you
go.
know, it's like
Backed by science, backed by data.
it's totally true.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. You're so welcome. Thank you. And what a pleasure to have you and just on and then talk with you and learn, share. Yeah, what a wealth, and what a nourishing conversation. And I really appreciate you taking your time. I could feel some time dilation happening where it's like opening up, where at one point during the conversation, I'm like, it's like we're blurring into the future, but then coming back to the present. All really good things, just to describe the, in one way, timelessness, but timeliness of the conversation and how apropos it is, and things I glean from it. I'll be kind of reviewing as well. So, yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing your gifts and your knowledge and your compassion, your love, and yeah, I encourage everybody that you'll see it, but check on the Holon. HOLON is how you spell Holon. But you'll see, Dr. Drew, Dr. Amy, and what they're doing, and obviously you can find much more about Dr. Amy if you haven't already. I hope you enjoyed this Compromise to Alchemized experience, this very powerful time of sharing, and keep listening, keep journeying, and blossom, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you another time. In these conversations, we do deep dives, and resources are aplenty, so please tune in and enjoy, and I'm so excited to have you along for the journey.